So good afternoon. Let me extend a warm welcome at this beautiful and air-conditioned room. You know what OCR is. Some people like it more, some people like it less. We like it more. And we would like to tell you a little bit more about invoices and invoice OCRs and templates that our users use in their companies for business purposes. So without further ado, let's move on to the agenda. I have split the agenda in two. So the first is about the requirements, how we collect data from the forms, how it is possible that we can read the data, and I'll show you two case studies, that is a cost invoice and a service request. I'll show you templates that are relevant to the topic, and finally I will provide you with a summary and a Q&A session. So let's start with OCR. That is adding text to the attachment. There are two models. That is OCR, pure and simple, in which you add text to the attachment, but there is also a smart attachment, that is OCR AI. And once you have added text to the attachment, you try to adjust the values from the attachment to the template, to the form that has been configured, which means that the document has been digitalized, and it also becomes more automated because much of the data is saved automatically, and the user may later verify the OCR that the system has produced, in which you simply confirm whether OCR has produced the right template or not, and sometimes provide additional training to the neural network working as part of the OCR AI. Now, we receive invoices from our contracting parties. We receive several hundred invoices. We process these invoices for half a year, for example, and at some point our contracting party says that because of some business event, for example, they have merged with another company, they have a different invoice template, and our smart solutions make it easier to implement such changes, because we may disable the template that has been used so far, or if the change is negligible, we can simply train the neural network to adjust the template to the needs of the companies that have just merged. Now, the system needs an additional BPS license. For OCR, it is enough to have an OCR framework license, but for OCR AI we have Intelligent Form Recognition Framework, and there is also ABBI component in the second one, because apart from text, now we are using, for text we're using version 11, and I'll show you this how this works in practice. Now we can also configure these recognition templates, and we can also add OCR AI in the service setting, and we can also configure recognition templates, and these recognition templates are the very foundation of our OCR system. And in some cases, if these fields are more complicated, we can add regular expressions, which is more likely to extract data from a particular form. Let me show you how the system works, and let me tell you right at the very beginning that this invoice can be used in any form. Our users have tested a variety of invoice forms with us. So these might be invoices started from mailboxes, started manually. It doesn't really matter how this attachment is read into a template. Now, so this is our example. This is our cost invoice. So once you have entered the attachment into the system, you are able to add the text layer onto the attachment. It doesn't take long. It just takes several minutes. Once you've loaded the text onto the document, and it takes just several minutes to complete the process, depending on how efficient your system is and how busy the BPS system is. And let me also mention the languages that are there in the default settings in the forms. Now, if we receive documents only in Polish, so then we may use only Polish as a default setting for the invoices that arrive at the system. And this is going to facilitate the work of the system, because the system is not going to waste time on recognizing the languages. Now, you may ask me why there are so few languages, but if you have documents that are saved in languages which are not here, it is not impossible to provide new languages in the system. We can add these languages to the system. However, some of the languages, such as Japanese or Korean, which use ideograms, these languages need an additional license, an additional fine reader license to work with our system. This is a subsequent stage in the process, that is how to recognize the number of the bank account. So this is a template that recognizes fields in the cost invoice. We have been able to define the field that is called the bank account field, the bank account number, and this is a field of a particular length. So this is the view rendered once the textual layer has been added. So it takes all the values into account, all the values that meet particular criteria. These are digit fields, and these values are later processed during recognition stage. And the system, based on what it has been trained to do so, and based on these regular expressions, it estimates the likelihood of the occurrence of a particular value. So the form and the length of the first block is more suitable for a bank account number, and that is why this is the actual bank account according to the system. The second is not. The second is telephone and fax numbers. Now, the values that are taken into account by OCR during the recognition process, all this is logged in the system, and you can preview it as an administrator, the values that has been taken into account in a particular field, and you can also follow the progress that the system makes while learning to perform its job, that is the neural network. Now the system may be adjusted, may be trained manually by the administrator. This is the verification step. And the template is quite peculiar, because to the left we have fields. These are template fields, and to the right we have an attachment. The task of the user is to find out whether the findings of the OCR mechanism are valid and whether you can accept the document and send it further. If there are any inaccuracies, you can adjust the values in the document, and this is also going to be displayed. Let's move on to the first case study, and this is an invoice and a service request. So let me start with an invoice. So let me start from the attachment panel. This is how we add the attachment. This is a simple invoice in Polish. One interesting thing is that we have templates for invoices in Polish, so we can work out of the box, and the OCR record recognition is at the very satisfactory level. For foreign invoices, more work is needed to develop accurate templates that obviously applies to German or British templates, which are non-standard in many cases. Let me also add that this is the latest version. Now, you've been bombarded with the web portal, but this is the SharePoint view that I am using. So you start with adding the textual layer. To the left, you have the steps that you have to make to complete the OCR process. And let me show reporting as well in Designer Studio. For quite a long time, the Report tab will help you to find out more about the data that is sent by the OCR to Designer Studio. You can find out more about processing history, processes time, queue, learn queue, recognition queue, and text layer queue. Now, in this particular case, you can see that the document has been modified by the service account, so the text layer has been added. And now what we're going to do, we're going to recognize the tax identification number, and this number has been recognized accurately. And we use this mechanism for Polish invoices. In the second case study, I'm going to show you how the mechanism works for templates which are developed solely by the user and not configured by our system. Unfortunately, interpreters cannot provide the service because the speaker doesn't speak to the mic. Well, I knew that you're going to ask this question sooner or later. Speaking of reading an OCR, now there is no such mechanism yet. I have gone through the list of functionalities that are going to be there in the upcoming versions of the system, and this solution is not there in the system. Sadly, well, I'm not very happy to say that, but we're not planning to implement this particular feature. At some point in time, our web developers have made a research to estimate whether this is possible, and it is possible to some extent, but I don't have detailed information on why we're not going to implement it. Now, it goes without saying that some of the documents and some of the invoices that are sent to us by the contracting parties, now the VAT is provided in such a table, so you don't have to create a list of the items. You can create a VAT separator, because there are different VAT rates in Poland, and you can learn the system to read the values, the VAT values. But if you have an invoice that you can process in such a way that to obtain the list of the items, this is not possible just yet. This is the OCR view that I am presenting now. What you can see to the left, you can see the form with the fields that have been displayed and recognized by OCR AI, and then to the right, the attachment that has been processed by the system. The fields that have been recognized by the system and that have been defined in the template, you can also tick the field that help you to teach the neural network system. Now, you can do it by going through the data and verifying whether the data are accurate. So if you look at this image, you can check if the image is the same, if the numbers are the same as in the attachment. There is one more thing that I forgot to tell you. When I talked about adding the text layer, we choose languages, and when we choose languages, OCR doesn't compare the words that it has recognized with the dictionary. So when you choose German, the system is not going to complete the words according to some of the suggestions that are there in the dictionary. All the system does is it can recognize the diacritics typical of a particular language. So what it recognizes is actually the diacritics and not the actual words. You can also see what the OCR was able to recognize. Now if you click the preview icon, you can see the actual results.
Szczególnie jeżeli są faktury igłowe. Faktury igłowe są bardzo ciężkie do rozpoznania.
Okay. And with this kind of invoice, you can look up what has actually been recognized, because sometimes some of the inaccuracies are due to the low quality of the print.
Going through particular fields, we can check exactly which data have been recognized correctly and which not, and have a look at how dates are handled. If we got an invoice where the date would be an American format, the OCR is ready for it, and they will see it as date and not as plain text. So we have the gross amount from the summary, and for some reason the net amount hasn't been recognized. And just to teach the mechanism a little better, you can tick this box and then on the form select which value should be entered here, and then we tick the box so that the system teaches this value for this specific counterparty, and we can move further. In the background, we have the teaching process happening. Let me show you. And here, yes, we have information that this document has been forwarded for the teaching. It's going to be processed and the system will be taught. The customers at the beginning of implementations ask us why it takes so long, and I say it doesn't take long, and I will refute that, because in my opinion, if the system is working slowly, then it means there is a problem with a server or our service that needs to be diagnosed. Why is that? Well, the user is uploading the document to the system and clicks, F5, refresh, until it goes to the next step. But there is no need, because when the document is being processed, you can upload another document for OCR, because they are processed in parallel. And depending on the general load of the system, this processing of one document will take from 2 to 15 minutes, and the 15 minutes is really an extreme example when the system is extremely overloaded. You can see that the document went further, so the document was added to the new field, and just to show you that the system learned something new, I will add another invoice from the same client. The data is different, but the format is the same, but there is different dates, different invoice number, the amounts are different. I will upload these documents, waiting for the text layer. And the text layer has been added, so you can see that it didn't take all that long, and now the document will move to the next step, where the tax identification number will be recognized. In the case of invoices, the tax ID number, at least in Polish, will be this differentiating factor, and based on those attributes the neural networks are being built, because if the system recognizes which tax ID number we have, then it is going to apply all the learned templates to it. Can we have a question? Please use the microphone, because interpreters cannot hear anything. Yes, about the distinguishing attribute for it, we don't need to use the tax ID number. I can give you an example of a British invoice where rarely we have the VAT ID. We do not have this differentiating attribute, and then we just use the telephone number of the client to build this distinguishing feature. So it's not the tax ID, can be a different phrase that would be unique for a given document or for the given client. The document hasn't moved to the OCR verification yet, but we can already see the net amount that was recognized correctly. This document will go to the verification stage in a second, and then I'll show it to you. From the implementation point of view, it's always the most difficult to start entering the invoices. The users get the new system and they need to spend a little time to create a neural network for specific templates. An invoice is a good example where usually there's an administrator gets that task, and somebody working in the secretariat, they are teaching the system, and at the beginning it takes a bit of effort to do it at the beginning, but as a result, later on the documents will be recognized sort of automatically, and there will be no need to enter information manually. Okay, so the fields that I showed to you before remain the same. Then we can see that in this case the system recognized that for this customer the net amount should be recognized in a specific section of the document, and of course those fields that are selected are those that we consider to be standard that we have in Polish invoices, but there's absolutely no problem in defining new fields in a given template if you want. For example, here we have the order number. You can easily add this field with the order number to the template configuration and just force the system to search for this number on the document. In this case, the system remembered that with this tax ID number, there is a neural network. So this would be this distinguishing feature for the neural network, and each customer for whose will have a unique tax ID, there'll be a new neural network. For some reason, the system might sometimes not recognize the tax ID. Either it was covered during scanning or there is low quality scan. Then the system will use the universal network. So it will not use the dedicated mechanisms for the given customer, but will use some default values, and based on that they will try to recognize the invoice. Of course, then the performance will not be as good as when dedicated neural network is used, but the recognition will still be better, and there will be still less work than inputting the document information manually to the form.
Tak, w przypadku, jeżeli chcemy stworzyć...
If we want to create our own distinguishing feature based on several locations, for example, we can do that. Because, well, the field is a distinguishing feature, but we can add some text that will say, okay, it's going to be a tax ID plus the city name, and it will be one neural network. And if, for example, the system recognizes the invoice comes from a different city, then we can add Chorzów, the city of Chorzów, and it will be created as a separate neural network based on those two distinguishing features. We can also define an extra field in the template. That could be the town or city. And such as here we have Warsaw, for example.
Tak. Dokładnie. Jeżeli omijając to ograniczenie, którym jest brak możliwości ładowania danych do list pozycji.
Yes, to bypass that limitation that there is no possible to add new details to the database, but we can of course add fields that will reflect the items list, and then in the template configuration we can add a field and then add it. Of course, it will take a lot of work in terms of teaching and learning for the system, but it is not impossible.
Dobrze, to ja przejdę, wrócę jeszcze
Okay, let me move on
do prezentacji.
to my presentation.
To był taki w zasadzie podstawowy przypadek użycia, który
So that was a basic application of OCR. We have noticed that that's what people use it for. Often cooperation with you starts from invoicing, and we often do smart OCR of invoices, but let's move on. Service request.
przygotowaliśmy.
In this case, we prepared a simple PDF document.
Wygląda całkowicie inaczej niż
It looks completely different to an invoice, and we had no ready solution to use.
od razu będziemy mieli
There is no ready solution that will allow us to get very good recognition, just like in the case of invoices.
procesowałem to
The invoice we processed was a mechanism that was not configured before, so that was just, Polish invoices project that was added, and it was the first attempt, so the recognition was quite impressive, considering that. If we create templates on our own, let me show you, I will open a service request. A service request, besides the customer details, also have request date, contact person, telephone number, email, name, and type of the device, etc.
studio
And coming back to Studio, in the system settings,
i zakładkę z
we have a tab that says OCR projects. And here we have a service request.
Wykorzystaliśmy tutaj podstawowy projekt rozpoznawania NIP-u.
And we use the basic project for tax ID recognition. On the top we have the tax ID of the applicant, but then we have a template that we added on top of it, which is the
Dodatkowe pole
allows us to
rozpoznawać.
recognize other fields on the form.
Bardzo dobrym przykładem jest
A very good example is the email address. Here we can create custom OCR AI field. We can put the field name, type, whether it's an amount, date, or it's unrestricted.
na podstawie
And based on this regular phrase, we can search
formularz wskazywać, pomagać.
and help the OCR in searching a given value on the attachment.
W przypadku przykładowo wystarczy tutaj
If we have dates in the configuration of the field, we can select date as the type,
wszystkie inne znalezione wartości
and the system will just reject all the other values that are not dates and do not fit into the template. Service request in the form of a simple table with data on some equipment that will be serviced. I will send this document
na paskę tekstową.
to the system.
I tutaj proszę zwrócić uwagę, że tutaj nie mamy
And please note that here there is no intermediate step, there is no step that says waiting for tax ID, because here we only have one template and there is no need to teach the system, there is no discriminant that could teach the neural network. We can just teach the universal network because we have a single template, and it is the template that is the discriminant. As far as automatic recognition of document type,
przeważnie klienci realizują
I think usually what customers do is the following.
rejestracja odbywa się w 75%
Usually,
jakiś udział sieciowy przez kontrolę.
either there is a hot folder involved when you register a document, the customers have scanners configured in that way, and they scan to a certain location. So you can have a specific document type. So for example, we know that invoices are going to one location and service requests go to a different location, and then at the level of the studio we can configure that specific forms are launched based on specific hot folders. Well, I think that he was asking about OCR to be for the OCR to classify the documents, and the OCR decides which form and which network should take care of that. Well, in theory it is possible, but you need to do it that you have some sort of overarching workflow, and then there is a template with a field that will define the form. So if it finds the field invoiced, it will categorize it into a field. So you can do like a super workflow that would divide those documents into sub workflows, what could be, service requests or invoices. So it is possible, but you need to keep an eye on this and teach the system so that it processes the documents properly. Okay, now we are at the OCR verification. We can see that this recognition is not very good here because the OCR doesn't have information about what to look for and where. It's just got the suggestion from the configuration settings that there should be a number. So it did configure something, but we should improve the mechanism by indicating which data to input. So for example, here should be the ID, this should be learned more. We look for the person who applied this, so that is wrong. We can delete it and indicate the field. I also wanted to show you the function of merging blocks. So in this case, the person that sent the application was recognized as two text blocks. In order to teach the system that they should consider it to be a one block, you can select the field and then click on those two values, name and surname, and the system will understand they have to connect those two into one field. And that is enough. And during the next OCR, this person will be understood as the one single block. Here we can put in the phone number, email address was uploaded correctly, and the device type was also downloaded correctly. But it was done separately, so I need to connect the blocks.
And what if the next request, the name will be composed of 6 blocks? This is yet another thing I would like to touch upon. That is, if it is composed of 6 blocks, this is fine. We can manage this, and the system is going to learn to process it. But if you add a 13-page description of a technical failure, it also is going to do, but the OCR is intended to process short phrases. 6 blocks is fine with suitable iteration. So if we mark 6 blocks and then 3, so the system is going to recognize it.
Ciężko im powiedzieć, bo
Now that's very difficult for me to say because the mechanism is intelligent and sometimes I think it's smarter than I am. But with documents such as this, with no predefined template, you have to train these neural networks. 3 iterations are sometimes enough, sometimes you need 8 to 10 iterations to obtain a suitable result. Do you have to train the system with the production system, or can you transfer it during migration? Are you going to migrate it to version 2019? So, speaking of the current configuration, I'll show you the Designer Studio version. These OCR templates and the learning outcomes are there. So if you have a service request, the service request will be exported to a particular file, and then it will be loaded in production, and then these findings, these learnings from the test environment will be transferred to your new environment. This is what is done by our clients when they test things, when they process invoices. Some contracting parties, some contractors of ours, they move a lot of invoices and they train systems to process these invoices. They transfer the templates to production, and then it makes it easier for them to process these invoices in the production environment. Now, going back to the template, I'll add some details to train it a little better, train this system a little better. Now, the installation field is empty. If we speak about conditional selection, it is not possible, but with other cases it is possible. So this pathway has been verified. Now you can change the value in the field, and if you find out that the value is empty, this may be copied from other fields, provided that it meets suitable conditions. So if you leave the field empty, then you copy the address, the user address to the field. And this mechanism is a transparent one to the user.
Is it possible to change the line of the service? Well, in other words, saying invoice. So would it be possible to change the company? For example, or is it worth the day?
Well, it's very, this data is
restricted for companies, so they don't want to share this with another company, so it's very difficult to make. O, jest. Jeszcze tylko sprawdzę, czy...
Let me see if the recording is fine. So going back to the last field, so then the deadline.
Proszę o chwileczkę cierpliwości, zaraz zobaczymy, dlaczego nam ekran wysiadł.
I need a little bit more patience from you. I have to find out why our screen is not working now.
Też korzystając jeszcze z tego formatu dat, który jest.
And the data formatting that we have is different than in the actual invoice, the attachment. So the system has recognized that this is a date, and it is possible to copy the date to the field that you can see to the left. And the date it doesn't really matter whether you use the date in American or continental format. The system is going to process the dates. Now, because dates are available in different formats and there is a need to process the dates in such a way that you render the best service possible. Speaking of special signs in tax ID, if you use standard recognition mechanism for tax ID in Poland, the mechanism will be adjusted to dictionaries. So if the dictionary featuring our contractors, there are if in this dictionary the tax ID numbers have hyphens, then the system is going to analyze several different conditions. Now, because we are running out of time, I'm going to move on a little further to train the document, and I'll process the second template to show you the learning outcomes.
To znaczy tak, licencja.
Jeżeli w przypadku FineReadera licencja obejmuje ileś.
The FineReader license.
W przypadku FineReadera licencja obejmuje określone ilość stron na miesiąc, przykładowo.
Covers a particular number of pages per month, so this may be 30,000 pages per month. So this is the only limitation. But we as BPS, we don't have any limitations for documents in a particular length of time. So the cost invoices would be this. So the cost is the same for a single field. That's actually true.
To znaczy tutaj w przypadku dokumentów, które mają już nałożone na
Speaking of documents in which the textual layer has been added to, the FineReader does it again because this textual layer is recognized by FineReader in its database for OCR to use it. So no matter whether the document contains the textual layer or not, FineReader recognizes and adds it again. Let me check in the reports whether the document has been able to learn. Now, with the service request, where there are more fields for the system to learn, the processing of the document took a little bit more because our environment is not exactly super fast, but it takes a little patience and it's going to be ready. Now, and the experience in production implementation of invoices suggests that the large number of invoices, for example, some contractors of ours, they register several hundred invoices daily. We you may want to consider adding, changing or adjusting the processors in your servers, because this kind of learning in neural networks may put a lot of strain on the servers, but you can also adjust the servers in such a way that the learning process takes place at night when users do not, when employees in the company are out of office. And speaking of logs, I would like to elaborate a little bit more on the action that recognizes the textual layer. And in standard action, in the log for the service request, you can see that the process takes 6 seconds. If you have admin privileges in the process, you can preview the data that was taken into account. So take an email field, for example. There are outcomes for an email field, and there are values for this field. And in the configuration, I added the settings that say that the system should look for something that looks like an email. Now the document has been processed. Now, if there is an error in the system, the report will provide you with suitable information for you to find out what has gone wrong.
Przeprocesowania dokumentu zanim zaniecha ponownego przetwarzania. Tutaj mam jeszcze drugie zgłoszenie serwisowe.
So this is yet another service request, which is provided in the same format. The data are slightly different, however.
Korzystając z tej chwilki, kiedy te dokumenty już
Now, as we have some time, because the documents are now being processed, feel free to ask questions. If we have 8 cores in the processors, will that not affect the work of the server? Well, that depends. That depends on the applications that are processed in the server. Now let me have a look at the service. Now we can distribute the themes according to the efficiency of the system and the hardware we have. But it's very difficult for me to answer this question. Well, I've heard that these threads may be adjusted according to the number of cores in the processor -1. And I was wondering if it is actually the case. That's actually the case. So when we run the implementation process, if we don't know what strain is going to be there in the system, that's the actual procedure that we follow. Well, it also depends on what this server does. If this server is dedicated to OCR, then it can do this, but if it's also a front-end server, there might be difficulties. So this, you have to take this into consideration. So the learning process, if there are a lot of documents, lots of pending documents, this may have a negative effect on the server. Now, if it's a shared server, you may want to perform these operations at night. So if there are lots of documents, so perhaps it might be a good idea to process these documents when your people are out of office. So the document has completed the learning process, and you can see that the recognition is much better in this template. Tax ID has been recognized, the number, the phone, the tax ID number, the name, the phone number, the email address, the name and type of the equipment that is to be serviced, the date, and the installation, the place of installation perhaps needs more learning, this particular field, but otherwise it all looks very good. So as you can see, as one step has been made, recognition is at about 90% on efficiency. So there are only 2 fields that haven't been recognized accurately.
Czyli już krótkim podsumowaniu, sam mechanizm inteligentnego rozpoznawania
By way of summary, the mechanism of smart OCR helps you to save time because you don't have to copy values manually. These data are loaded automatically. Documents are digitalized automatically. Those documents that are provided in hard copy, we process them with scanners and archive them in digital form. If we bombard the system with a large number of documents, the system is going to be efficient nonetheless because it can process documents in parallel order. And with this learning mechanism, we can also respond to changing templates in documents. The best example in this respect are invoices, because every single client has a different invoice format, and our neural network can be adjusted in such a way that it recognizes almost all data in the document. And please bear in mind that OCR is not only about invoices. You may want to work with other documents, and these documents may be processed in a way that is accurate. Now it's time for Q&As. Are there any new features in version 2019 for OCR? Because what you've presented, this is version 2017. Now, this is actually version 2019, but in the SharePoint display mode.
Are there no
in OCR AI? No, there is no other new features in this.
Oh, it's the same mechanism which worked in 2017.
Are there any plans for development? So now you have to speak to my boss. There are plans, obviously, but speaking of AI, we're planning to use it in workflows, in templates and forms, but we are using AI to facilitate the mechanism. So since you don't have any questions, thank you very much for your attention. Again, thank you very much. Let me add a few remarks from the whole team. Well, I would like to extend a word of thanks to you and also congratulate you on your patience and stamina, but despite fatigue, you'll be back home with new ideas on how to use BPS, considering these new features that have been provided. And we do believe that you will be able to use the platform in a new and innovative way, and we all look forward to seeing you next year.